The champagne had barely gone flat from my law school graduation when I discovered the betrayal that would change everything. My grandparents, Wei and Lin Chen, arrived in America with nothing but determination and a handful of traditional Taiwanese recipes. 40 years later, Chen's Garden had grown into 12 thriving restaurants across the state, worth over $3 million. They'd built more than a business. They'd created a bridge between their homeland and their new country, serving authentic dishes that told the story of their journey. After my parents died in that car accident when I was 8, Nai and Ye became my world. They raised me in the apartment above the original restaurant, where the scent of 5-spice and star anise was my lullaby. While other kids complained about homework, I studied at corner tables, surrounded by the gentle clatter of chopsticks and the warmth of their pride in my achievements. Uncle David, my grandfather's only son, had always harbored resentment. His wife Susan would make pointed comments about how some people got special treatment, how the real family was overlooked for an outsider. I'd learned to ignore their bitter glances during family dinners, focusing instead on my grandparents' encouraging smiles. But at 78, both Nai and Ye were showing signs of confusion. Small things at first, forgotten appointments, repeated stories, misplaced keys. David had swooped in like a concerned son, offering to help with their affairs. The first shock came when I drove to their beloved Craftsman house for our traditional Sunday dinner, only to find strangers moving in. A cheerful realtor informed me the property had sold 2 weeks ago. "But where are my grandparents?" I'd stammered. "Oh, the family moved them somewhere safer," she'd replied casually. "Lovely elderly couple, but you know how it is when they start getting confused." I found them at Sunset Manor, a grim assisted living facility that smelled of disinfectant and despair. My vibrant Nai sat vacant-eyed in a plastic chair, while Ye stared blankly at a game show on television. When I approached, Nai looked at me with clouded recognition. "Maya," she whispered, "but David said you told him you never wanted to see us again." My heart shattered. David had been intercepting my calls, my letters. He'd isolated them, convinced them I'd abandoned them. Worse, I discovered he'd already liquidated 2 restaurants, claiming it was necessary for their care. Legal documents showed his real plan: have them declared incompetent with him as guardian, giving him complete control over everything my grandparents had built. "Don't let them erase us, little dumpling," Nai had whispered when the nurse wasn't looking. "Don't let them forget who we were." That night, I made a promise that would define everything that followed. Over the following weeks, I pieced together the full scope of David's manipulation like a prosecutor building a case. Each discovery cut deeper than the last. I started visiting Sunset Manor daily, timing my arrivals when David and Susan weren't there. The staff, initially wary, gradually warmed to me when they saw how my grandparents' faces lit up at my presence. A kind nurse named Patricia pulled me aside one afternoon. "Your uncle said you were too busy with your career to care about them," she whispered, "but they ask for you every day. Your grandmother cries sometimes, saying she doesn't understand why you stopped loving them." The words hit like physical blows. I'd been calling their old house for months, leaving messages that were never returned. I'd sent graduation announcements, birthday cards, letters about my job search, all intercepted by David's careful screening. During one lucid moment, Nai grabbed my hand with surprising strength. "He showed us papers," she said, her voice gaining clarity. "Said you signed something, said you didn't want any part of the family business, that you were ashamed of us." My blood ran cold. "What papers, Nai?" "Legal things, your signature. David said you told him we were holding you back, that you wanted to forget where you came from." Tears streamed down her weathered face. I didn't want to believe it, but there it was. Your name. That night, I drove to the county recorder's office and requested copies of all recent filings involving my grandparents' estate. What I found made my hands shake with rage. David had forged my signature on documents declining any inheritance rights. Worse, he'd filed a petition requesting guardianship over both grandparents, claiming they were no longer competent to manage their affairs. The medical evaluations attached to his petition were damning and fabricated. I knew because I'd accompanied my grandparents to their real doctor appointments, and their mild cognitive decline was nowhere near the severe dementia David's hired physician described. I spent sleepless nights researching, cross-referencing dates and documents. David's manipulation was methodical and thorough. He'd gradually taken control of their finances, moving money between accounts, selling properties under the guise of simplifying their lives. He'd even changed their mailing address to his house, ensuring complete control over their communication. The most devastating discovery came when I found David's real estate communications. He wasn't just liquidating assets. He was planning to sell the restaurants to Apex Dining Group, a corporate chain that would strip away every trace of Taiwanese culture and rebrand them as generic Pan-Asian establishments. Everything my grandparents had built, their recipes, their stories, their bridge between two cultures, would be sanitized into bland profitability. But the final betrayal was personal. In David's emails to his lawyer, I found his true feelings. The old couple always favored that orphan over their real family. She got the college education, the praise, the promises of inheritance. It's time actual blood relatives got what they deserved. Once I'm guardian, I'll make sure she never sees a penny. Sitting in my tiny apartment, surrounded by legal documents and evidence of systematic elder abuse, I felt something cold and determined settle in my chest. David had made one critical mistake. He'd underestimated the granddaughter he'd always dismissed as an outsider. I was about to show him exactly what 4 years of law school could accomplish. The law library became my fortress. While other new graduates networked at happy hours, I buried myself in elder law statutes, studying the intricate dance between competency evaluations, guardianship proceedings, and irrevocable trusts. David's timeline was aggressive. His guardianship hearing was scheduled for 6 weeks away. I had to move faster. My first call was to Elena Rodriguez, a family friend who'd helped my grandparents with routine legal matters for years. When I explained the situation, her voice turned sharp with professional anger. David approached me first, she admitted during our clandestine meeting at a coffee shop far from David's usual haunts. Wanted me to help expedite the guardianship. I refused the moment I read his petition. The medical evaluations were clearly exaggerated, possibly fraudulent. Your grandparents have mild cognitive decline, not severe dementia. Elena leaned forward, lowering her voice. There's a narrow window here, Maya. If we can establish an irrevocable trust, while your grandparents still have legal capacity during lucid moments, we can protect their assets permanently. But timing is everything. The plan crystallized. Create the Chen Family Legacy Trust with me as trustee, transferring all assets before David's guardianship could take effect. It was legally complex, but ethically bulletproof if we could prove my grandparents understood what they were signing. I began my careful reconnaissance. David and Susan visited Sunset Manor every Tuesday and Friday evening, staying exactly 90 minutes. They'd arrive with takeout dinner, sit stiffly through stilted conversation, then leave with visible relief. On other days, the facility was quiet, understaffed, and largely unmonitored. My first real visit was on a Wednesday afternoon. I brought photo albums, dozens of pictures documenting our family's history. As I slowly turned pages, something magical happened. Nine-Eye's eyes sharpened. Her voice grew stronger. "That's our first restaurant," she said clearly, pointing to a faded photograph. "We painted those walls ourselves. Yaya insisted on that exact shade of red, for prosperity. And this one?" I showed her a picture of me at 12, helping in the kitchen. "My little dumpling, learning to fold wontons. You were so determined to get the pleats perfect." She looked directly at me. "Maya, something's wrong, isn't it?" David keeps saying things, but my heart knows different. Over several visits, using photo albums and familiar recipes as memory triggers, I helped my grandparents piece together what David had been doing. During their clearest moments, Ye would grow agitated. "He's selling our restaurants? To strangers?" His voice carried the strength I remembered. "But the recipes, the stories, that's not just business, that's who we are." "He told us you didn't care anymore," Nine-Eye whispered. "But you're here. You brought our memories back." The breakthrough came on a Thursday morning when both grandparents were unusually alert. Elena arrived with the trust documents, disguised as another family friend bringing tea and conversation. She patiently explained each section in both English and Mandarin, ensuring they understood completely. "This protects everything you built," Elena said gently. "Maya becomes the guardian of your legacy, making sure it stays true to your vision." Yaya's signature was shaky but deliberate. "David wants to erase what we created," he said with sudden clarity. "But Maya understands. She knows why we came here, what we wanted to leave behind." Nine-Eye signed next, her hand steadier than it had been in months. "Little Dumpling always saw the whole picture. Money is just paper. Legacy is in the heart." The notarization happened swiftly. Elena's assistant, posing as a visiting volunteer, witnessed and sealed the documents. Within hours, we'd filed the trust papers and begun the complex process of transferring assets. Over the next 2 weeks, I executed the plan with surgical precision. Bank accounts moved into the trust, restaurant ownership transferred, real estate deeds updated. Elena's law firm worked overtime, processing each change with meticulous documentation. I moved my grandparents to Willowbrook Memory Care, a facility that cost 3 times more than Sunset Manor, but treated residents like family, not inventory. The staff understood Taiwanese culture, served familiar foods, and most importantly, recognized that cognitive decline didn't erase a person's dignity. By the time David discovered what had happened, every asset was legally protected, my grandparents were receiving proper care, and I held irrevocable authority as trustee. His panicked phone call came on a Tuesday evening. "What the hell have you done?" he screamed through static. "Protected our family," I replied calmly. "Something you seem to have forgotten how to do." The real battle was about to begin. David's retaliation came swift and vicious. Within 48 hours of discovering the trust, he'd hired Blackstone and Associates, the city's most expensive litigation firm, known for their scorched earth tactics and billable hour records. The first salvo arrived via certified mail, a formal demand letter claiming I'd manipulated mentally incompetent elderly persons into signing documents they couldn't understand. David alleged I'd taken advantage of their confusion, isolated them from family, and essentially stolen $3 million through elder abuse. But David's public campaign proved more damaging than his legal threats. He called every family member, every restaurant manager, every community leader who'd known our grandparents. His story was carefully crafted. The ungrateful granddaughter who disappeared during law school, only returning when she smelled inheritance money. Maya convinced them Susan and I were stealing, he told anyone who'd listen. She poisoned their minds against their own son. Now she's got them locked away where we can't even visit. The lies worked. Uncle Richard stopped returning my calls. Cousin Jennifer sent a cold text asking if the rumors were true. Even some restaurant staff began treating me with suspicious glances. David had weaponized the community's respect for filial piety, painting me as the ultimate ungrateful child. The confrontation at Golden Dragon, our flagship restaurant, was David's masterstroke of public humiliation. I'd come for a routine meeting with the manager when Susan burst through the front door, her voice pitched to carry across the dining room. "There she is!" Susan shrieked, pointing at me like I was a wanted criminal. "The girl who stole from her own grandparents. They raised you, fed you, paid for your education, and this is how you repay them." Every customer stopped eating. Phones appeared, recording the scene. The manager looked mortified, caught between loyalty to the family and avoiding a scene that could destroy the restaurant's reputation. "Susan, please," I said quietly. "You're upsetting the customers." "I'm upsetting them? You're the one who manipulated two confused old people into signing over everything they worked for. You've stolen their life's work." The performance was Oscar-worthy. Susan's tears looked genuine, her outrage seemingly justified. To anyone who didn't know the truth, I appeared to be the cold, calculating villain she described. David escalated further when his initial legal challenges failed. Elena had documented everything perfectly. Medical evaluations proving my grandparents' competency during lucid moments, video recordings of their clear consent, witnesses who could testify to their understanding of the documents. Frustrated by the trust's ironclad construction, David shifted tactics. He filed a motion claiming I was unfit to serve as trustee due to my inexperience and questionable judgment. His lawyers argued that someone fresh out of law school couldn't possibly manage a complex estate and business portfolio. "Miss Chen may have a law degree," his attorney argued in preliminary hearings, "but she lacks the business acumen and emotional stability required for fiduciary responsibility. Her actions demonstrate impulsive behavior and family manipulation." When that failed, David tried a more personal approach. He hired a private investigator who began following me, documenting my daily routine, looking for anything that could suggest irresponsible behavior or questionable associations. The PI was clumsy. I spotted him twice, once at a coffee shop, once outside my apartment building. The harassment expanded to my professional life. David somehow discovered which law firms I'd applied to and began calling partners, warning them about my character issues and family disputes. 2 potential job offers mysteriously evaporated without explanation. But David's desperation led to his first crucial mistake. Trying to prove ongoing elder abuse, he demanded court-ordered visits with my grandparents at Willowbrook. What he found destroyed his narrative completely. Instead of confused, medicated prisoners, he discovered Nai teaching other residents to fold dumplings in the activity room, while Ye played Jiangqi with a volunteer who spoke Mandarin. Both grandparents were alert, engaged, and clearly thriving in their new environment. "Where's Maya?" was the first thing Nai asked when she saw David. "She visits every day, brings pictures, reads to us. Why did you tell us she didn't care?" David's court-mandated visit lasted exactly 30 minutes. He left shaken, his confidence visibly cracked. For the first time, he'd seen proof that my grandparents weren't the helpless victims he'd portrayed, but people whose minds had cleared once removed from his toxic manipulation. That night, I received a call from Elena. Her voice was tight with controlled anger. "Maya, I need you to come to my office immediately. David's lawyers just filed something that changes everything." "What kind of filing?" "They're claiming your grandparents were already legally incompetent when they signed the trust documents. They've got a new psychiatric evaluation dated 3 days before our signing." My blood turned to ice. That's impossible. We have video evidence of their competency. I know, which means David's lawyers either falsified documents or bribed a psychiatrist. Either way, we're no longer dealing with civil litigation. What are we dealing with? Elena's voice was grim. Criminal fraud charges against you. The courtroom felt like a gladiatorial arena. Judge Patricia Hendricks presided over the packed gallery, where extended family members sat divided like wedding guests choosing sides. David's lawyer, Marcus Blackstone himself, commanded the plaintiff's table with theatrical confidence, while Elena and I occupied the smaller defense space with our carefully organized files. "Your Honor," Blackstone began, his voice carrying the authority of 30 years crushing opponents. "This case represents a textbook example of elder abuse disguised as family concern. The defendant exploited her grandparents' declining mental capacity to manipulate them into signing away their life's work." He gestured dramatically toward David, who sat ramrod straight, projecting wounded dignity. Mr. Chen watched helplessly as his own daughter turned his confused parents against him, isolating them from family before coercing them into signing documents they couldn't possibly understand. Blackstone's opening was masterful, painting me as a calculating predator who'd preyed on vulnerable elderly people. He presented David's fabricated psychiatric evaluation with convincing authority, describing my grandparents as severely demented individuals incapable of making rational decisions. When Elena rose for our opening statement, the room felt hostile, but her voice carried quiet steel as she addressed the jury. "Ladies and gentlemen, this case isn't about inheritance disputes or family disagreements. It's about a daughter who protected her grandparents from systematic abuse by their own son, and that son's desperate attempt to cover his tracks through perjury and document falsification." Elena's strategy was surgical. Rather than defending my actions, she went on the offense, presenting David's financial manipulation first. Bank records showed systematic transfers from business accounts to David's personal funds. Restaurant employees testified about David's orders to reduce food quality while raising prices, maximizing profits before planned sales. The breakthrough came when Elena called Patricia, the nurse from Sunset Manor. Her testimony shattered David's narrative completely. "Mr. Chen visited exactly twice per month," Patricia said firmly. "He'd drop off generic groceries, stay maybe 20 minutes, then leave. He specifically instructed us not to allow his parents to make phone calls, claiming it would confuse them further." And their condition during Maya's visits? Completely different. They'd light up when she arrived. Their conversation was clear, their memory sharp. Maya brought photo albums that triggered remarkable clarity. I documented several instances where both grandparents demonstrated full mental capacity. Blackstone's cross-examination faltered when Patricia produced her detailed nursing notes, documenting my grandparents' lucid moments and David's deliberate isolation tactics. But the case's turning point came when Elena called Dr. Sarah Kim, the geriatric psychiatrist who'd evaluated my grandparents for Willowbrook placement. Based on extensive cognitive testing, Dr. Kim testified, both patients showed mild cognitive decline consistent with normal aging, not the severe dementia described in the plaintiff's evaluation. Their capacity for decision-making remained intact, particularly regarding familiar subjects like family and business. Elena then delivered her devastating blow. "Dr. Kim, have you reviewed the psychiatric evaluations submitted by the plaintiff, supposedly conducted 3 days before the trust signing?" "I have, and it's medically impossible." "How so?" "The evaluation claims both patients scored 0 on basic cognitive assessments, indicating complete dementia. But I personally examined them 5 days later, and they scored within normal ranges for their age group. Such dramatic cognitive recovery doesn't exist in medical literature. The courtroom erupted. Judge Hendricks demanded order as Elena continued her methodical destruction of David's case. My grandparents' court appearance was Elena's masterstroke. Both had been having good days, and their testimony was heartbreaking in its clarity. David told us Maya said she never wanted to see us again, Nai testified, her voice strong despite her frail appearance. But when she came back, when she showed us our pictures, we remembered the truth. David was the one keeping us apart. Yaya's testimony was even more damaging. My son wanted to sell everything to corporations who would change our recipes, remove our culture. Maya understands what we built. Not just restaurants, but bridges between our old home and our new one. When Judge Hendricks asked if they understood the trust documents, both grandparents answered with remarkable lucidity. Maya protects our legacy, Yaya said simply. David saw only money. But Elena's final move crushed David completely. She'd traced the fabricated psychiatric evaluation to its source. A disbarred doctor David had paid $15,000 to backdate false documents. Your Honor, Elena announced, producing bank records and recorded phone conversations, we have evidence that Mr. Chen commissioned fraudulent medical documents and perjured himself in sworn testimony. We're requesting immediate dismissal of all claims and referral to the district attorney for criminal prosecution. The courtroom fell silent as Elena played the damning recording. David's voice clearly instructing the fake psychiatrist to make them sound completely crazy and backdate the evaluation. Blackstone stood abruptly. Your Honor, my client wishes to withdraw his petition. But Judge Hendricks was furious. Mr. Blackstone, your client has committed perjury in my courtroom and attempted to defraud the court system. Withdrawal is not an option. David's face drained of color as the implications hit him. Not only had he lost his case, but criminal charges now loomed. Outside the courthouse, David finally exploded, his careful facade cracking completely. You think you've won? He screamed at me, ignoring the reporters and cameras. I'll destroy your legal career before it starts. No firm will touch someone who tears apart families. I looked at him calmly, feeling only pity for the man who'd let greed poison every relationship he'd ever had. David, I said quietly, I already have everything I need, and you have nothing left to threaten me with. As he was led away by FBI agents executing warrants for fraud and elder abuse, I realized the revenge was complete and perfectly legal. 6 months after the trial, I sat in my new office at Rodriguez and Associates, watching autumn leaves drift past my window. Elena had offered me a partnership track position, specializing in elder law, and my first cases were already teaching me that my grandparents' story wasn't unique. Too many families hid predators behind blood relations. The legal resolution had been swift and decisive. Judge Hendricks upheld the Chen Family Legacy Trust in its entirety, confirming my authority as trustee. David received a 2-year sentence for fraud and elder abuse, though he'd only serve 14 months with good behavior. Susan, deemed a reluctant accomplice, received probation and community service. More importantly, the court ordered David to repay $400,000 he'd embezzled from the restaurant accounts, money we used to establish the Wei and Lin Chen Scholarship Fund for first-generation immigrants pursuing higher education. But the deeper victory wasn't measured in legal vindication or financial restitution. It lived in the small moments that followed. At Willowbrook Memory Care, my grandparents had found a community that honored their dignity. Nai taught cooking classes, sharing stories behind each recipe with residents who'd never tasted authentic Taiwanese cuisine. Yeye played Xiangqi with other Chinese immigrants, their games conducted in rapid-fire Mandarin, that made him laugh like I hadn't heard in years. "Little dumpling," Nai said during one of our afternoon visits, her voice carrying the strength I remembered from childhood. "You kept your promise. We're not erased." The restaurants thrived under management that understood their cultural mission. Instead of David's profit maximization scheme, we implemented his grandparents' original vision. Each location became a cultural center, hosting language classes, traditional festivals, and community gatherings. The cookbook project, featuring family recipes alongside immigration stories, became a bestseller with proceeds funding the scholarship program. Most surprisingly, the extended family quietly rallied around our side once David's crimes became public. Uncle Richard called with a stammering apology. Cousin Jennifer sent a heartfelt letter acknowledging she'd been manipulated by David's lies. Even some restaurant employees who'd initially supported David admitted they'd been pressured into statements they didn't believe. The family business expanded in ways David never would have imagined. We opened a cultural center attached to the original restaurant, where elderly immigrants taught traditional crafts while their grandchildren learned heritage languages. The space hosted weddings, celebrations, and community meetings, becoming exactly the bridge between cultures my grandparents had envisioned. Elena often remarked that my case had become legendary in elder law circles, not for its legal complexity, but for its demonstration that family loyalty wasn't about blood relations. It was about protecting those who couldn't protect themselves. My legal career flourished beyond my wildest expectations. Word spread about the young lawyer who'd taken down a $1 million fraud scheme, and referrals poured in from families facing similar situations. Each case taught me something new about the delicate balance between respecting elder autonomy and preventing abuse. But the true measure of victory came during quiet moments at Willowbrook. Last Tuesday, Ye had one of his clearest days in months. We sat in the garden, watching other residents tend vegetables he'd helped them plant. "Maya," he said, his voice strong and sure. "David wanted to sell our stories to strangers who would change them into something we never were. But you understood. We didn't build restaurants. We built home." Nai joined us, carrying tea in the precise way she'd taught me as a child. "In Taiwan, we have a saying, 'The tree remembers its roots.' David forgot his roots, tried to cut them away for money. But you, little dumpling, you helped us remember who we planted our tree to become." As the sun set behind the care facility's peaceful grounds, I realized David's betrayal had ultimately backfired. His attempt to erase our family's legacy had instead crystallized it, forcing me to understand what truly mattered about the inheritance my grandparents wanted to leave. The $3 million had never been the real treasure. The true legacy was the bridge between cultures they'd built, the community they'd fostered, the stories they'd preserved, and the values they'd instilled. David had seen only money where love and purpose lived. That evening, I updated the trust documents one final time, adding a provision that the Chen Family Legacy Trust would exist in perpetuity, protecting not just financial assets, but the cultural mission my grandparents had spent their lives creating. "Don't let them erase us," Nai had whispered that first day at Sunset Manor. Looking around at everything we'd preserved and expanded, I smiled. Mission accomplished.